Hello, my name's Iris. My mom said she needed a place to stay, just for a while. I said yes, because that's what daughters do, right? But she didn't come alone. She brought him, her boyfriend, unemployed, entitled. And by the end of the week, he was sitting on my couch like he owned the place. By the second week, my name was scratched off the fridge, my father's photo was in the trash, and I found out they'd started filing paperwork without me. They called me the stable one, and then used that to gut my life from the inside out. So I did what no one expected. I took everything. But do you know what still keeps me up at night? It wasn't what they took. It's how quietly they thought I'd let it happen. Would you have stayed? The air inside my condo still smelled like new paint and eucalyptus cleaner. That morning, sunlight filtered through my kitchen blinds in long, golden stripes, and for a moment, it felt like peace had finally taken a seat at my table. I was barefoot, watering the little row of succulents on the windowsill, humming without realizing it. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every scent, every inch of space. It was mine. After years of renting rooms, sleeping with earplugs, and tiptoeing around other people's noise, this silence, was freedom. I took a slow sip from my coffee mug and leaned against the counter. A breath, then another. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for anything. That's when my phone buzzed. "Hey, baby," my mother's voice sang from the speaker, sticky sweet like syrup. "Listen, I was wondering if I could stay with you for just a little while, just until I get some things settled." My stomach dropped. Not because she asked, it wasn't the first time, but because I could already hear what was coming next. And still, like a fool, I asked, "Just you?" She laughed. "Of course, sweetheart. Just me. It'll be temporary." Promise. I looked around my freshly curated apartment, the gray walls I picked myself, the couch I'd waited months to afford. My eyes rested on the closed door to the guest room. Empty. Ready. My mistake. I opened it. "Fine," I said. "Just a couple weeks." I should have known better. With my mom, temporary had no expiration date, and just me usually meant plus whatever chaos she'd invited into her life that month. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. I had just come out of the shower, hair wrapped in a towel, a half-unbuttoned shirt hanging off one shoulder. I peeked through the peephole. It wasn't just her. There he was. Randall, cargo shorts, 2 oversized duffel bags, a Bluetooth speaker clipped to his belt loop, playing something with too much bass for 9 in the morning, and my mother, standing beside him, grinning like she'd just brought home a puppy. "Iris! Surprise!" I opened the door, slowly. My towel was still damp against my neck. Randall stepped forward immediately, like the threshold was an invitation. "Hey there," he said, already halfway inside. "This place is nice, really nice." He dropped his bags onto my couch like it was a hotel lobby. My mother kissed my cheek as if I wasn't frozen in the doorway, mouth half open. "You remember Randall, don't you?" she said, brushing past me. "He's just gonna stay here a while with me. Things got a little messy with his apartment." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't trust myself to say it without screaming. Instead, I watched as Randall kicked off his shoes, on my rug, and flopped onto the couch, letting out a satisfied sigh. "Feels like home already," he said, smiling up at the ceiling fan. That sentence sat heavy in the room, heavier than any of their luggage. That afternoon, I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. "It's temporary," I repeated in my head. "Just breathe." "You said yes to your mom, not to Randall. Maybe he'd be gone in a week. Maybe." By dinner time, I knew better. He'd taken over the living room, pulled the coffee table closer to him without asking, and connected his speaker to the TV. Some podcast blared loudly while he laughed at jokes only he understood. My mother, meanwhile, unpacked groceries from a plastic bag. "Iris," she said, "I hope you don't mind. I used your card. Just grabbed a few things we needed." I blinked. "My card?" She waved it off. "You always say I can use it in an emergency." "What was the emergency exactly?" I asked. She didn't answer. Randall turned up the volume. Later that night, the guest room door was closed and the hallway light was on. I sat on my couch, the same spot where Randall had dumped his stuff earlier, and tried to read a book. But every few seconds, I could hear him snoring through the thin wall. Not just snoring, snorting. It was the kind of sound that made your skin crawl, irregular and loud. I got up, walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood in the dark. The apartment felt different already, less mine, more invaded. I hadn't agreed to this. I hadn't said yes to Randall. I hadn't said yes to my mother rewriting the rules on the fly. But I also hadn't said no. That was the problem. I used to think the loudest betrayals came with screaming, with slammed doors and curse words. But some betrayals, they sneak in with duffel bags and Bluetooth speakers. They settle on your couch. They sip from your mugs. They borrow your peace. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I didn't even try. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned, slower than usual, slower than I remembered. I thought about saying something, about setting rules, about demanding answers. Instead, I whispered into the quiet, "This is still my home." But even I didn't believe it. By the time morning came, the corners of my apartment already felt different. The silence I had worked so hard to protect was gone, scratched away by snoring, heavy footsteps, and someone else's voice rising from the television I used to watch alone. I walked toward the kitchen, still rubbing sleep out of my eyes. My sock caught on something, Randall's sneakers, right in the middle of the hallway. One flipped sideways like he'd stepped out of them mid-walk and never bothered to look back. I stepped over them and kept going. In the kitchen, a pan still slick with oil sat on the stove. A half-eaten slice of cold pizza rested on a plate nearby. The fridge door was cracked open. Randall's energy drink, half full, stood guard next to my almond milk. I didn't say anything. I just closed the fridge, rinsed the pan, and wiped the counter in tight, quiet circles. This wasn't cohabitation. It was an occupation, and somehow I'd surrendered the lease. I walked past the living room and paused. My bookshelf, the one I'd arranged by color and author, not for aesthetics, but because it made me feel calm, was empty. Books were piled into a cardboard box that sat on the floor like someone had packed me up without notice. The top was labeled, Iris. Stuff? Randall was in the middle of setting up what looked like a gamer's paradise. 2 monitors blinked on the coffee table. Wires curled across the rug. A folding table from God knows where had taken my ottoman's spot. I stood still, not moving, just watching. I wasn't sure if I was more stunned or numb. He noticed me then. "Oh, hey," he said, casually. "Hope it's cool I moved a few things. Your books were kinda in the way. Figured you didn't read 'em much anyway." I blinked. That was it. No question, no apology, no curiosity about whether I was okay with my personal space being rearranged. Just the assumption, his comfort prioritized over mine. I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I didn't trust the version of my voice that might come out. Instead, I walked to the box, opened the flap, and ran my fingers over the spines of novels I'd collected since college. They were dusty now, folded wrong. One of the hardcovers had a torn sleeve. It wasn't just a bookshelf that was gone. It was the reminder that I used to take up space here, without permission. That evening, Vera and Randall returned from grocery shopping. I wasn't asked if we needed anything. I didn't even know they'd gone out. My mother dropped plastic bags on the counter and handed me the receipt. "You've got your card on file, right, sweetheart?" she said. "It's easier this way." I didn't respond. Randall opened a soda and leaned against the fridge, chewing like he was enjoying the silence more than I was. I sorted through the receipt. Eggs, 3 types of chips, beer, a frozen meatloaf I'd never eat, scented candles that smelled like something between cologne and regret. My mother caught my eye. "Don't be so serious, Iris. You've always been the stable one. You can handle a little extra, can't you?" That word again, stable, like a compliment that doubled as a shackle. I stared at the receipt, then quietly placed it in my drawer, along with the rest of my monthly expenses. No reaction, just memory. 2 days later, while working from home, I logged into a Zoom meeting with my headset on, hoping to salvage some control over my week. Randall had decided to rearrange the living room to improve his connection. He moved the Wi-Fi router and now sat near the entryway with both monitors blinking like he was live streaming his own version of comfort. The call started. My manager greeted the team. Then, from Randall's direction, the screeching sound of a car crash compilation pierced through the air, followed by his laughter. One of my coworkers smiled awkwardly through the camera. Iris? Is someone watching NASCAR wrecks in your living room? I wanted to laugh. Instead, I clicked mute and let my screen go black. This wasn't background noise, this was intrusion made visible. After the call, I stared at my blank screen. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I picked up my old notebook from the side drawer, the one I hadn't used since budgeting my down payment. On the top of a fresh page, I wrote in capital letters, "What I pay for." Underneath, I began listing every item: rent, Wi-Fi, water, electricity, groceries, furniture, streaming services, appliances, random fix-it items, light bulbs, hand soap. Every line felt like a boundary being reclaimed. That night, while Randall watched TV at full volume, I found myself tracing the edges of my couch, the one I bought after my first promotion. I'd saved 6 months for it, and I'd chosen the fabric with care. A soft charcoal gray, firm cushions, modern legs. I remembered lying on it the first week I moved in, finally breathing. That memory felt stolen now, not just blurred, but overwritten by someone else's comfort. I got up, walked to my closet, and pulled out the receipt folder. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew why I was doing it. Something inside me had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. They wanted me to support him? Fine. Let's start counting. Support, after all, comes with receipts. By Thursday, my dining table had transformed into something resembling a forensic accounting station. Every bill, every digital transaction, every grocery delivery I'd ordered since the day they moved in, sorted, printed, highlighted. I bought folders from Office Depot and labeled them like I was preparing for a court case. Utilities, food, cleaning supplies, rent, furniture, random maintenance, all of it. Color-coded tabs helped me track patterns. Red meant recurring charges, green for shared use items, and yellow. Yellow was for everything they consumed but never acknowledged. That pile grew fastest. I sat back with a coffee in hand, black now, no time for cream. It was early, not yet 8 a.m. Randall was still asleep. I knew because the television hadn't come on yet and the air didn't smell like burnt toaster waffles. Facts don't lie. People do. The knock came just as I opened my laptop to finalize the expense spreadsheet. Vera leaned in the doorway holding a plate of scrambled eggs, like we were in some sitcom where families ate together and laughed over breakfast. "Hey, honey," she said, setting the plate down without asking if I'd eaten. "I was thinking, Randall's been having trouble with his unemployment forms. It'd be easier if the lease had his name on it. Just for paperwork, nothing permanent." I stopped typing. My fork hit the plate like a dropped coin. She smiled like this was a perfectly reasonable suggestion. "You know how government stuff is complicated." "Temporary?" I asked, not lifting my eyes from the screen. She nodded. "Of course, just to help him file. It doesn't change anything." The audacity of it was impressive. Not because I didn't expect it, but because she could say something like that while still sipping her tea like nothing had shifted, like she hadn't just asked me to replace myself on my own lease. I didn't argue, I didn't protest. I just let silence settle between us like fog. That's the thing about erasure. It rarely starts with shouting. It begins with suggestion. When she walked away, humming a tune I used to love, I opened a browser and logged into the leasing portal. I wasn't even sure what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd catch this before any damage was done. But when I clicked the Tenant Information tab, I saw an Update Submitted notice dated 3 weeks prior, and when I opened the file, it was my name, my address, my unit, my lease, except the form requested to remove me as the primary tenant and listed Randall Murtaugh instead. Vera's email address was used for confirmation, and my signature, slanted, close, but not mine. They hadn't even warned me. I scrolled back, jaw locked. The form had already been flagged in process. That meant it hadn't finalized yet, but it was in motion. Just a matter of time. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. They didn't just want space. They didn't just want food. They wanted a legal rewrite of my reality. They were trying to replace me, on paper, in practice, in every way that mattered. I walked into the hallway and opened the shared filing cabinet. The bottom drawer held mail I rarely touched, stuff Vera tucked away, claiming it was too cluttered for the counter. There it was, the printed application. My name, misspelled once. My signature, crooked, a little too round. The document stank of ink that didn't belong to me. I sat down on the floor right there in the hallway and held the paper in my lap like it had weight. Ice filled my chest, slow and numbing. They wanted me to disappear. I thought back to the day I signed the lease. I'd been sitting in a real estate office downtown, too nervous to smile, clutching a folder of pay stubs and proof of income. The leasing agent was kind, called me Miss Quinn, even though I told her just Iris was fine. When she handed me the keys, I walked to my car and cried, not out of fear, but pride. That signature had meant something. It was proof I'd clawed my way out of a house filled with noise, bad decisions, and the expectation that I'd always be the one to fix everything. And now that signature had been forged to erase me. That night, I stood in the living room holding a framed photo of me and Vera from 2 years ago. It was taken at a coffee shop, a rare day where we smiled and meant it. I looked younger then, naive. I pulled the frame apart and set the photo face down in a drawer. This wasn't about being a daughter anymore. This was about survival. By the time midnight came, I had scanned every financial document, every email, every lease communication into a drive. I made 2 backups, one on the cloud, one on a USB key I'd tape under the kitchen sink later. Then I clicked on the desktop folder I'd previously labeled Bill's Stuff. I renamed it Proof, Legal Ownership Displacement Attempt. Let them come. Let them keep thinking I was silent because I was soft. They erased me on paper. Now I'll write the rest. By the time I opened my eyes the next morning, the light coming in through the blinds felt colder than usual. Not temperature-wise, but emotionally. There was a stillness to it, like the air had decided to stay quiet so I could hear myself think. Except I didn't want to. I pulled on my robe, tied it at the waist, and stepped into the hallway. The apartment had the scent of stale takeout, mixed with whatever cologne Randall thought was appropriate to wear while lounging shirtless in someone else's home. I made my way toward the kitchen, passing the living room, Randall's temporary throne. He lay sprawled on the couch, one arm hanging over the side, a pillow tucked under his shoulder like he lived there. Because at this point, he pretty much did. The sound of his snoring echoed softly off the walls. I used to wake to birdsong. Now, it was him, breathing heavy, unbothered. In the kitchen, I reached for the cabinet above the sink. I wanted my coffee mug, the one with my initials on it. It wasn't there. I checked the dishwasher. Nothing. I finally found it in the sink, unwashed, stained. I set it aside. Then I saw it. The fridge, once covered with sticky notes, my reminders, my grocery lists, my quotes of encouragement, was now stripped bare except for one memo stuck at an angle. It used to say, "Don't forget to be kind to yourself." But someone had scratched out the word yourself and scribbled Randall in thick black Sharpie. I stared at it. My name didn't belong anywhere anymore. I didn't touch it. I didn't pull it down. I just left it there. Like an exhibit in a museum titled, "What Happens When You Say Nothing?" Later that afternoon, while gathering laundry, I passed by the side table in the living room, where I always kept the photo of my father. It was gone. The spot was empty, a faint square of dust showing where it used to sit. I checked the bookshelf. Nothing. Then the TV stand. Then my room, just in case I'd moved it and forgotten. That kind of forgetting would have felt like mercy. Eventually, I found it. In the trash. The frame was cracked. The glass chipped. The photo, creased along the edge, like someone had shoved it in without care. My father's face stared back at me, partially folded under a pizza box and an empty bag of Doritos. I lifted it carefully, as if it still had breath. Randall was sitting at the counter when I turned around. I didn't scream, I didn't raise my voice. I just held up the picture and asked, "Did you throw this away?" He looked over his shoulder, barely registering what was in my hand. "Oh, that?" He shrugged. Didn't know it mattered. Looked old. Behind him, Vera walked in from the hallway, rubbing lotion into her hands like none of this was happening. I turned to her. This was the only photo I had of him. My father. She glanced at the picture, then at me, her face unreadable. "Sweetie, he probably didn't realize it was important. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Bigger." I felt something crack, not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel in your ribs when something is lost forever. Not just the photo, but what it represented. I walked past them, photo still in hand, and went to my bedroom. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe. And then I heard it. Not a sound in the room, but a sound in memory. My dad's voice, from a long time ago. I couldn't recall where we were, maybe the back of his old pickup, maybe just walking back from school, but his voice was clear. "Don't let anyone treat you like an option in your own life." I opened my eyes, and I knew. That night, I tried to salvage the frame. I glued what I could. Replaced the glass with a plastic sleeve from an old binder. It wasn't perfect, but it was intact, just like me. Not untouched, not whole, but still standing. The next morning, over coffee, I brought it up. "I need that frame back," I said, voice even. That was the only picture I had of Dad. Vera didn't flinch. She took a sip of tea, then said, as calmly as if she were reading the weather, "If you're not comfortable with the arrangement, maybe it's time you moved out." I looked at her, fully, not the version of her I wanted to see, not the mother who once sewed buttons on my coat or showed up to my graduation half an hour late, but smiling. I saw her now for what she was, someone who would rather lose her daughter than her convenience. She meant it. She would rather I leave than confront the disruption she brought into my life. My spoon clinked against the edge of my mug. I stood up slowly, pushed in my chair, and nodded. That wasn't a suggestion. That was an eviction slip dressed in motherly concern. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. Instead, I went to my room, sat at my desk, and opened a new document. Titled it, Contingency Plan. First line, movers, then storage unit options. Next, legal consultation. I wasn't deciding whether to leave anymore. I was planning how to make it matter. I was going to exit this place in a way they would never forget. Not with violence, not with rage, but with evidence. With silence so loud it would echo long after I'd gone. Later that night, before bed, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I picked up my red lipstick, the one I never wore, and wrote across the mirror, "They wanted me gone. I'll leave nothing behind but silence and a message." The message began the next morning. I woke up before sunrise, the sky still the color of bruised lavender. The lipstick on the mirror had dried overnight, streaked a little from the humidity, but still legible, still red. I looked at it one last time before brushing my teeth. They wanted me gone. I'll leave nothing behind but silence and a message. I meant every word. I moved like a ghost through the hallway, barefoot, careful not to wake Randall, who was predictably passed out on the couch again, a game controller resting on his chest like a badge of mediocrity. The living room looked like it had hosted a frat party for one, open soda cans, crumbs on the rug, a sock draped over the armrest like a lazy flag of conquest. I stepped over it and went to the kitchen. I made coffee without turning on the lights. Habit. I didn't need illumination to know where everything was. I'd designed this kitchen down to the drawer dividers. By the time the machine hissed out its last breath of steam, Randall had stirred. I heard his shuffle down the hallway. He walked into the kitchen, yawning dramatically, and leaned against the counter with a smirk. "Morning, robot," he said, chuckling as he reached for a banana. I blinked. "Sorry?" "You know, the way you keep everything so clean, sterile, all white walls and silence, no music, no mess, like living in a lab." I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee. The mug still had a faint chip near the handle, one Randall had caused last week and never acknowledged. From behind him, Vera entered. She caught the tail end of his joke and let out a light laugh. Oh, come on, she said, glancing my way. She's always been a little rigid. You know how Iris is. I smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was the sort of smile you wear at funerals when someone tells an inappropriate joke. I put my mug down, carefully, and looked at them both. Randall, you're living in my home, I said, each word delivered like a document in court. You don't get to insult me in it. He raised an eyebrow, chewing the banana now, still amused. You're really sensitive, huh? Vera placed her hands on the counter. Don't start a scene. He was teasing. You know he jokes. I looked directly at her. This will be the last week he speaks to me that way, joke or not. Then I picked up my mug and walked away. I spent the next few hours working from my bedroom, trying to ignore the occasional outburst of laughter from the living room, where Randall was watching compilation videos again. People falling, cars spinning out, the usual things that entertained him. But I kept my focus. I sent reports, joined Zoom meetings, answered emails. That afternoon, I went out to grab a package from the mailbox. It was a short walk down to the lobby, and I lingered outside a little longer than necessary. The air felt better out there, less used. When I returned, something felt wrong. I stepped into my room and stopped. Everything was off. Not dramatically, just enough. My closet doors were ajar. Inside, several shirts had been rearranged by color. A box of scarves that used to sit on the top shelf was now on the floor. My desk had been dusted, poorly. A few of my journals were stacked neatly on the nightstand, which I hadn't touched in days. And then I noticed what was missing. The photo of me and my college roommate, one of the few people who'd stayed when things fell apart years ago, wasn't on the shelf. My drawer, where I kept letters from my father, was open slightly, and the stack looked thinned out. I stepped back out into the hallway, heart pounding, not from panic, but from that specific kind of rage that settles deep in your stomach and grows slowly. Vera was folding laundry at the end of the hallway. You went in my room, I said. She didn't look up. I just straightened up a bit. It was dusty. You never organize. You went in my locked room. I used the backup key. It's still my home, too. No, I said quietly. It's not. She turned then, finally, arms crossed, laundry still in her hands. You're being dramatic. I didn't throw anything away. You moved things that weren't yours. You touched letters that weren't for your eyes. You crossed a line that I made very clear. She rolled her eyes. Honestly, Iris, you're overreacting. There it was. The sentence every boundary breaker uses when they're caught. The words meant to gaslight you into silence. I didn't give her that power. That evening, I called a locksmith. I didn't wait for permission, didn't ask if it would bother anyone. I just did it. He arrived just after 6 p.m. While Randall played video games with his headset on and Vera took a bath, I stood beside my bedroom door, arms crossed, watching the lock get replaced. The locksmith handed me the new key. Should I toss the old one? Yes, I said. Please. Once he left, I wrote a note and taped it to my door. If I have to lock my piece away, you are no longer part of it. I didn't hear anything about it for hours. Randall saw the note first and scoffed loud enough for me to hear. Vera walked past it twice and said nothing, pretended it didn't exist. But it was there, and I was already moving behind the scenes. That night, before bed, I stood in the kitchen sipping water. Vera came in to grab something from the fridge. We moved like strangers now. Her robe rustled as she reached for juice. You really going to act like this over a room? She said, not even facing me. I set my glass down. No, I said. Not over a room. Over the fact that you've made it very clear who you value here, and it isn't me. She turned then, leaning against the counter. You're being dramatic again. I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. The next time someone crosses into my space, they'll find it empty. Her expression tightened. Is that a threat? I shook my head. No. It's a promise. And promises, unlike people, deserve to be kept. I didn't wake with urgency that morning. No fire in my chest, no pounding in my ears, just clarity, the kind that settles in after you've rehearsed the same betrayal in your head 100 times. I showered, I dressed. I made breakfast with slow, deliberate movements. I even watered the succulents I hadn't touched in a week. By the time I logged onto my computer for my 10 a.m. meeting, Randall was already sprawled across the couch, his laptop open but unused. He was flipping channels with one hand and sipping iced coffee from a cup I had specifically labeled for guests. Of course, that label meant nothing now. The meeting started. We were reviewing quarterly data, nothing fancy, just graphs and budget updates. I shared my screen, answered questions, nodded when I needed to. Then something happened. My screen froze. "Are you still with us, Iris?" My manager asked through a stuttering connection. I scrambled to refresh, clicked tabs, tried to rejoin. My browser said I wasn't logged in. I checked the email app, nothing. Then I opened the trash folder, just in case. And there it was. Gone. The entire client thread. 47 messages, proposal drafts, legal documentation. Every part of the discussion I'd led for the past month. I stood up so quickly my chair squeaked against the floor. Randall looked up at me, startled. He pulled off his headset, blinked like he didn't expect to be interrupted. "Did you use my laptop?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He shrugged. "Yeah, I was watching that documentary about that dude who faked being a doctor. Wild story. I probably clicked something. Didn't mean to delete anything." I just stared at him, not blinking, not breathing too heavily, just watching. This wasn't clumsy. This wasn't accidental. This was sabotage with a smile. "You had your own laptop in your lap," I said, voice low. "Yeah, but your screen's bigger," he answered without shame. I nodded once, turned, and went back to my room. I didn't slam the door. That's not how wars like this are won. Later that evening, after making copies of every restored document I could, I pulled out a manila folder from my drawer, one that had accumulated unopened mail over the past month. I didn't usually read every envelope the moment it came. Bills I already paid online, junk mail I ignored. But one envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to Randall Murtaugh. Sender, Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. I opened it. Inside, a confirmation document. He had listed me, full name, address, as his financial supporter and domestic cohabitant. He'd used my employment records, my address, even my estimated income. And somewhere, someone had stamped that as verified. I sat down on the edge of my bed and let the paper fall to my lap. When I confronted him the next day, he was on his phone, sprawled in the recliner like a teenager after school. "You listed me as your financial supporter?" I asked, holding the paper up. He looked up from his screen, squinted, then nodded. "Yeah, it made the process easier. I figured it wouldn't hurt anything. You're stable. They love stable people." That word again. I didn't answer. I just turned, walked back to my room, and opened a new document on my laptop. Evidence of unauthorized digital access. I wrote everything down, every incident, every date, every screenshot I'd taken since he moved in. Then I sent the document to HR, not as a complaint, not even with a request, just with a note. For compliance tracking, no action requested at this time. I didn't want an apology. And I wanted leverage. Over the next few days, I began extracting myself from the apartment like a careful surgeon separating tissue. I packed photo frames, external hard drives, my first aid kit, my spare charger, my tax documents, anything with my name, my fingerprints, my memory. Bit by bit, the version of the apartment that had once reflected me was fading, and I was the one erasing it, intentionally this time. One evening, as I loaded a box into my closet, Randall passed by and chuckled. "You finally Marie Kondoing your life?" he asked. I closed the box and smiled. "No, just prepping for a move," he laughed. "Good for you. Change is good. Might even be good for your mood." I didn't answer. Vera was sitting nearby, pretending not to hear. She was thumbing through a magazine she hadn't actually flipped a page in for 10 minutes. They thought I was being dramatic. I was being strategic. That night, after cleaning the counter and checking the locks, I took the last of the tools I had bought the week before. Screwdrivers, adhesive clips, a small hidden camera. I installed it above the bookshelf, facing the front door and part of the living room, just in case. When I finished, I stood back and looked around the room. I hadn't smiled in weeks, but now I did. Not because anything had changed, but because I had, Let's see who signs for packages now. And they signed something they didn't even read. It was Saturday afternoon, a few days after the camera went up, and Vera insisted we show our faces at her cousin Lynette's backyard barbecue. I hadn't been to a family event in over a year, not out of spite, but necessity. Somehow, family gatherings always turned into a spotlight competition where I was the set crew behind the curtain, and everyone else took center stage for things they didn't earn. I drove us there. Randall rode shotgun, wearing a button-down shirt he'd borrowed from my closet without asking. I didn't comment. Vera sat in the back, applying her lipstick in the mirror like she was about to host a fundraiser. By the time we arrived, Lynette's yard was full. Folding chairs surrounded 2 picnic tables covered in potato salad, baked beans, store-bought cupcakes with melting frosting. A speaker played a playlist full of 90s R&B. Kids screamed somewhere near the swing set. Randall was already halfway across the yard before I'd finished locking the car. "He's been such a blessing," Vera said, waving toward him like she'd just sent an angel into the party. "Keeping me grounded, helping with everything since I left the house." I blinked. My mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. The woman who paid for the drinks was invisible. The man drinking them was the hero. We walked over to the food table. Vera accepted hugs and greetings, smiled like she was auditioning for sainthood. No one really looked at me. Lynette handed me a plate and said, "You look tired." It wasn't a question. It was a sentence you throw at women when you don't want to acknowledge their boundaries. "I'm good," I replied, taking the plate but not filling it. After a while, someone raised a glass of lemonade and tapped a fork against it. "Let's take a second to honor the people who keep our family going." Heads turned, eyes sparkled. I stood near the back, barely holding my paper plate. "To Vera," someone said. Applause. "And to Randall," another voice chimed in. "Man's been solid for her since she moved out, held her down, gave her stability." I stared. I clenched my jaw so tight I could feel the muscles twitch. There it was, my life rewritten without me, in front of a crowd, toasted with off-brand soda and shallow smiles. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I lifted my phone. I had planned to use the camera for security, for documentation, but now it had a new job. I tapped record and filmed Vera's face as she laughed beside Randall, captured her nodding like the words were true, as if the sacrifices I made were hers, as if the roof over her head had materialized from prayer and not the 40-hour weeks I clocked to afford that mortgage. The next morning, after breakfast, I passed by the kitchen table and noticed Vera's iPad sitting open, half charged. She'd been using it to order vitamins and read her tabloid articles. She never set a passcode, said it was too much trouble to remember. I picked it up, swiped open. Her inbox was cluttered, as usual. Ads, spam, a few bills, but one folder stood out. Dana. I clicked. There were messages from Randall. Not to her, to someone named Dana. And it didn't take long to understand. "Once I get the claim finalized, I'll have the funds. Then I'm done playing house." No, she doesn't suspect a thing. The old lady thinks I'm her second chance. She's gullible, stable, but gullible. You know how these women get when they hit their 60s, scared of being alone. There were more. Photos. Promises. A screenshot of Vera's insurance info attached to a plan application under Randall's name. I didn't feel shock, just confirmation. He was using her, and worse, she handed him the tools. I copied every message, took screenshots, saved PDFs, transferred them to a secure folder on my drive. Later that day, I went to my room and opened the drawer where I kept my father's necklace. I hadn't worn it in years. It was simple, thin gold chain, small pendant engraved with 3 letters that meant nothing to anyone but him and me. "Trust is earned," he once told me in high school, "and even blood lies." I slipped the necklace over my head. That evening, I printed the messages and slipped them into an envelope labeled "Confidential, for Vera only." I didn't add a note. Didn't write, "Love Iris." I just placed it on her nightstand like you'd leave a bill, because that's what it was. A receipt. She read it the next morning. I knew she had because by 8 a.m., Randall was pacing the hallway like a caged animal. Something had cracked. I was packing my shoes when he knocked on my door. I opened it slowly, meeting his eyes with the kind of quiet that unnerves men who rely on your silence to stay comfortable. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked. I raised one eyebrow. "You'll find out soon. Hopefully, Dana will explain it better." His face twisted. Vera screamed about an hour later. A thud first, then her voice shrill, confused, betrayed. She yelled his name 3 times. I was in my room, taping up a box of kitchen utensils. I didn't go check. I didn't ask if she was okay. I didn't rush to mediate or soothe or explain. Instead, I pressed the tape down, labeled the box Essentials, and whispered to no one in particular. One more night. There was a silence to the morning I hadn't felt in months. Not the kind that came from exhaustion or resentment, but the kind that felt earned. Like the calm after boarding a flight that's taken too long to taxi. I sat on the edge of my bed, shoes laced, sweatshirt zipped. I glanced around one last time at the walls that used to feel like mine and now just felt like surfaces. The moving truck arrived at 6:20 a.m. On the dot. I'd parked it myself the night before in the alley behind the building, backed in clean and quiet. No one had noticed. By 6:30, the dolly was loaded with the first boxes. I worked alone. I'd paid for movers, but I wanted to be the one to carry it all out, at least the important stuff. The rest could be handled by professionals. It was a principle thing. You don't need permission to leave what was never yours. The couch I bought from a second-hand shop when I first moved in. It went first, then the mattress, the rug, the TV, the router, the coffee table, every lamp, every dish, even the light bulbs. I unscrewed them methodically, each twist another stitch removed from a wound that had overstayed its healing window. At 7:12, Randall emerged from the hallway in gym shorts and a t-shirt that wasn't his. He rubbed his eyes, blinked at the empty space where the couch had been. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. I didn't turn around right away. I placed the last of my silverware into a padded crate, closed the lid, and finally faced him. Reclaiming. He laughed, or tried to. "Is this a joke?" I handed him an envelope. Inside was a copy of the real estate transfer, a notarized letter, a date-stamped final notice. "The condo's sold. You've got 2 days to vacate." He blinked, jaw open. "You can't be serious." Vera came into the room then, hair tied back, house slippers on. She looked between us, eyes narrowing. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply picked up the envelope again, handed it to her, and watched her read. Her hand shook by the second page. "No, you didn't," she whispered. "You didn't sell it." I looked her dead in the eye. "I did. 3 weeks ago. The papers were signed. You just didn't notice because you were too busy defending a lie." They stood there, speechless. The space between us colder than the tile beneath my feet. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. A process server in a windbreaker held out a manila envelope. "Randall Murtaugh?" He took it, frowning. "You've been served," the man said, turned, and walked away. I didn't ask what was inside. I already knew. I'd seen the copies. Dana was suing him. Fraud, identity theft, misuse of personal data. The cherry on top. Vera's signature was listed as co-signer on 2 of the documents he submitted. Whether she knew it or not, her name was on the line. He used her signature the same way he used my house, freely and foolishly. Later that morning, I walked back into my bedroom and stood by the dresser. There was one final box sitting beside it, taped neatly, labeled Day 1. It was the first box I'd ever packed when I moved into this place. Back when I was fresh out of college, riding high off my first real job offer, scared out of my mind but optimistic. It held my first journal, a framed certificate from grad school, the receipt from the dinner I bought myself to celebrate being on my own. Back then, I packed it with shaky hands. Today, I carried it out steady. At 11:47, Vera came to my room. She didn't knock, just stood in the doorway like she hadn't spent the past few months slowly dismantling everything I had built. "You didn't have to do this," she said. Her voice was tight, trying to hold emotion without letting it spill. We're family. I zipped my duffel bag. You didn't lose a daughter, I said, calm. You gave her away. He just picked her up. She didn't respond, just stood there, blinking, and I saw the weight finally land on her. But I didn't soften, not because I was cruel, because softness had been exploited enough. I walked past her and placed the last bag by the door. I gave one last look at the walls, now stripped bare, the floors dusty where furniture once stood. And then I left. As I drove out of the city, the skyline shrank in my rearview mirror like a memory I'd finally released. Buildings became silhouettes, traffic thinned, the air began to change. I didn't just move out, I moved on. By the time I crossed into Montana, the sky had shifted from pale blue to the kind of gold you only see in postcards. I pulled over on a gravel shoulder, stepped out, and stretched. There was nothing particularly poetic about the moment. No swelling music, no tears, just peace. Back at the apartment, on the kitchen table I once scrubbed every Sunday morning, sat a single sheet of paper, handwritten, unfolded. This was never your home. It was mine, until you treated me like a guest. No signature, no return address, just my words. But healing isn't always quiet. The first morning in Bozeman came without an alarm. No shouting from the living room. No microwave slamming at 2 a.m. No footsteps I didn't recognize, just light, soft and natural, pouring in through thin cotton curtains and landing on the hardwood floor of my tiny apartment above the coffee shop. For the first time in months, I heard only one set of footsteps, mine. I got out of bed slowly, my joints creaking like old floorboards. There was no rush, no one asking for anything, no guilt clinging to the air like humidity. I padded barefoot to the window and pulled the latch open. The mountain air met me halfway, cool, crisp, slightly sweet. Below, a cyclist zipped by. A teenager loaded pastries into the cafe display through the back door. The hum of real life, nothing dramatic, just life. No shouting, no footsteps but mine. Later that morning, I finally unwrapped the photo. It had arrived in the mail from a small restoration service I'd hired 2 months earlier. I'd almost forgotten about it during the chaos, but it came, quietly and whole, just like I'd hoped. The photo showed me, about age 9, sitting on my dad's shoulders in the park near our old duplex in Arvada. He was mid-laugh. My cheeks were red. I was wearing a windbreaker that looked like it belonged in a thrift store window. I hadn't seen his face like that in years, not in memory, not even in my dreams. I chose a wooden frame from the local co-op, nothing ornate, just warm cherry wood, smooth to the touch. I hung it above the corner chair in my new reading nook, right beside the window where light hit just right mid-morning. I didn't cry when I stood back to look at it. I smiled. Peace isn't forgetting, it's choosing what to remember. A few days later, while folding linens in my small living space, my mind drifted back to Denver. I saw myself again, walking out of that apartment with the last of my boxes, Vera crying in the doorway. Randall nowhere in sight. That morning felt both distant and sharp. I remembered the last thing I said to her. You asked me to support him. I chose to support myself. Then I walked, not out of hate, not even anger, just necessity. I haven't heard from her since. And that silence? It's not painful anymore. It's permission. In the afternoons now, I plant flowers outside the cafe. The owner lets me manage the small bed near the sidewalk. I've got lavender, snapdragons, even a few tomatoes in the back corner. It's nothing fancy, just soil, sunlight, water, but it grows. I talk to customers too. Nothing deep. Weather, book recommendations, the best cookie of the week. They smile. I smile back. And it feels real. Not like the kind of smiling I used to do back in that apartment, tight, teeth clenched, waiting for the next apology that never came. I even bought a new pillow last week, just one. Not because someone might need to crash, not because I was hosting, because it was mine. This isn't a new life. It's just the first one I chose for myself. A few weeks after I'd settled in, I got an email from my cousin Ellie. She's the only one who never took sides, who always spoke in facts. She forwarded a local news article about Randall, insurance fraud, multiple counts, fines, civil suit, court hearing. Thought you'd want to see, Ellie wrote. Your name didn't come up. She didn't mention Vera. I later learned she'd moved out of state. Sold what was left of the furniture. The condo was foreclosed. Randall's name is nowhere on anything now, except court records. No bitterness, just facts. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and reread the letter I'd written but never sent, the draft I left folded in the top drawer of my old desk. It wasn't long. I didn't leave because I was weak. I left because I stopped hoping you'd change. Some letters aren't for them. They're for us, for the parts of us that need to hear we were right to leave. That choosing ourselves wasn't betrayal, it was survival. I folded the letter again, placed it in a box marked unsent, not because I was holding on to it, but because it reminded me of a time I let go. The next morning, I opened the coffee shop alone. I flipped the sign to open and brewed the first pot of the day. A breeze came in through the open front door and lifted the corner of the curtain. It was quiet, but not empty. I sat at the counter, cradled my cup, and looked out the window at the mountains that no longer felt foreign. I lost a home, but found a life. And that, maybe, was everything. Sometimes, choosing yourself means walking away from the people who expected you to stay silent forever. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about reclaiming identity, boundaries, and peace in a place where they were never respected. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from someone who called it family, but treated you like a backup plan? If this story struck a nerve, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories about quiet strength, healing, and the kind of justice that doesn't always make headlines, but sure makes an impact.